Welcome to the G.I. Joe New News Review. I am David Allen. The following content was originally intended for the G.I. Joe fan club, but due to unforeseen circumstances, this content will no longer be used in that venue. And so I wanted to share them with you here. I hope you enjoy. Hello, welcome to another episode of the G.I. Joe Fan Club Live. I am joined by my co-host, Dan Klingensmith Jr., the author of Creating the History of G.I. Joe series of books. Hello and good morning, Jan. Dan, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Also joined by my other co-host, Jason Packard, creator of custom one-of-a-kind G.I. Joe items for the audience, such as challenge coins, magnets, blueprints, stickers, and so on and so forth. And I'm joined by our special guest, the VP of Boys Toys, Kirk Bozigian, and the head of the G.I. Joe brand from 82 to 87. Thank you, Kirk, for joining us. We very much appreciate taking the time to speak to us today.
You're welcome. I'm always want to get together and talk with friends about G.I. Joe. So let's go.
All right. So Dan, I think, provided you with a list of questions ahead of time.
Yeah, but I didn't read it.
Oh.
So let's just go.
Okay. Well, first off, I would like to know a little bit about the beginnings of the thought process of reimagining the G.I. Joe brand. I know there was a bit of a meeting, and everybody was kind of giving ideas, and some of those ideas were shot down. Obviously, in this type of business, you kind of throw stuff at the wall and you see what sticks and stuff like that. Can you give us a little insight into that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Real American Hero brand was a process of let's call it evolved over time. Originally, the original plan was to simply reintroduce the original 12-inch G.I. Joe figure that had been off the marketplace for about 4 or 5 years. So that was the original thought. When we started showing it, we showed it to our biggest buyer at the time, which was Sears Roebuck. Nobody even remembers Sears anymore. I think they've only got about 7 stores in the whole country.
I remember them.
Yeah, but at one time, I mean, Sears was the largest toy retailer in the country. They were the largest retailer in the country. And it was that way, from a toy point of view from the maybe 30s all the way up to the early to mid 80s. So we presented to Sears, and the buyer there had remembered the success of the original G.I. Joe, but just said, hey, there's nothing new here, nothing different. The marketplace has changed, and it had. I mean, the marketplace had changed to Star Wars. Star Wars was the largest, selling boys action brand at the time. And so we had to kind of, go back to the drawing board. We met with our R&D group again and threw the challenge out to them, figure out a way of doing G.I. Joe that's going to get this generation of kids excited. And I say this generation because my pet theory is that, when we talk about generations in the real world, we're talking 20 to 25 years per generation. But when you're talking about kids and toys, I believe that every 5 years is a new generation.
Right.
And so, even with G.I. Joe, from 82 to 87 is one generation. 86, 87 to 92 is another generation. And 92 on is another generation. And I can see it in the comments that, many fans make about their favorite G.I. Joes. And so we threw it back at our R&D team, and they came up with modifying 3 3/4-inch figures from Mego, primarily chips Buck Rogers, and I think that was it. Chips and Buck Rogers figures, where we actually took because we like the posability. We like the fact that they were much more movable than Star Wars figures. And so we modified those figures, painted them all olive drab, gave them World War II helmets and World War II weaponry, and created a couple of small vehicles. We had a Jeep, I believe, and a tank, modified model kits, Jeep and tank, and the rest is history.
Why the well, you just answered my second question. The 3 3/4, the buck, how you came up about that, but that was definitely a different model for the marketplace. Like you said, only Chips and like the Dukes of Hazzard and things like that were out there. Was that something that was a challenge for you guys developing that? Because there wasn't a lot of that out there. The 5 points of POA were prevalent with Star Wars. Mego had a different model. And then obviously there was the high advanced figures like Micro Machines out there as well. What out of that?
You mean, I think you mean Microman. Yeah.
You're talking about?
Well, yeah, Micronauts. Yeah, Dan. He's referring, I believe, to Micronauts, which was still also developed by Mego.
Right.
Mego took that articulation and incorporated it into their 3 3/4 inch lines figures, and they did all licenses. I mean, that was Mego's forte, was grabbing as many different licenses as they could. So I refer to Chips and Buck Rogers because those are the two that I can remember. But yeah, they did a variety of them. There was also another company, a small company, that was more famous for their science toys, and that was Gabriel. I don't think anybody even remembers Gabriel, but Gabriel Toys, which did science kits, also did a line of Lone Ranger action figures at around this time, 79, 80. And they were highly articulated as well. By highly articulated, I mean much more articulation than Star Wars. And we always saw the posability of the original G.I. Joe as something we wanted to make in the smaller figure. That was its brand image, the points of articulation. So we always wanted to incorporate that into our G.I. Joe brand. And so we went after what at the time, because we didn't have time to develop all this on our own. Year 2, you saw the addition of the swivel arm battle grip, which added another 2 points of articulation. But we just simply, to put it politely, knocked off what was already in the marketplace.
And remastered it too.
So Kirk, were there any challenges with because I've seen documents where there's like that direct correlation or direct comparison, I should say, to Mego and Joe's, and kind of showing the differences. Were there any challenges with making sure that it wasn't a direct, duplication of what Mego was doing, but really making it unique? Were there any challenges that you remember?
I guess the biggest challenge was to get engineering buy-in. The engineers were always concerned about making. I mean, these are guys who had at the time had no experience developing action figures. Their experience was in developing preschool toys, and so the biggest challenge was to get them to understand how to get back into the business of boys' toys, because so many of them had been out away from that business for so many years, and so they were always concerned about, and that's why we went with one generic buck, because they were so concerned about being able to mold the product, make sure the product would survive all of our quality tests, etc.
And I know there's I have a sample figure where you guys were even toying with the idea of wrist moving, because it's like an 83 character, and there's, again, probably just messing around, trying to
Well,
see what
yeah,
else you
I
guys
mean,
can do.
we were always trying to improve upon what we had. And so, I mean, I can remember moving on or later on in the brand, we wanted to try and, make as many points of articulation as the original 12-inch GI Joe had. And, I'm seeing it today. I mean, there are brands out there now that have that kind of articulation. But we could never get our engineers to want to put in the extra work needed to do that. Nobody likes the work. Not a slam against our engineers.
Nobody likes change, I guess, right?
They were under tremendous scheduling and cost constraints, and so no one wanted to take the time to. If we had another quote advanced team, maybe we could have had somebody working on that, but we just couldn't get people to move off the dime on that.
My video is acting up at the moment, Dan. I'm going to let you have this for the moment.
Okay. Yeah, I saw you jumping around a little bit. Jason, I don't know if you have the questions in front of you. We can kind of go jumping back and forth if you'd like.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about, I wanted to ask some perspective on it. So Kirk was the brand manager of G.I. Joe entirely from 1982 to 1987. And then after he moved and transitioned to, I think it was Child's Toys, G.I. Joe declined in sales for a few years, but Kirk was brought back in, if I recall, in 1990 and introduced some new concepts and new marketing strategies that put G.I. Joe right back on top again. By 91, 92, and 93, the sales were almost equal to what they were in 85 and 86. One thing I wanted to ask perspective on specifically is, Kirk, do you remember the Dino Hunter set from 1993? Can you tell us a little bit about your recollections of it, and maybe if you had any part in the design of it or marketing of it that you think was good, being an exclusive item like this?
Yeah, not only do I remember it, but I was one of the people who helped conceive the idea. By 1991 or 92, I had taken the stand that there's no reason why G.I. Joe should ever be attacked by any other action figure brand without at least firing back with our own version of it. Mm-hmm. And at the time, Jurassic Park had come out, and I believe the second Jurassic Park movie was being developed. In fact, I remember being out in LA, going out to LA with our design team to see and talk to Lucas about, Spielberg about Jurassic Park and licensing Jurassic Park, which we ultimately decided not to do. But that led us to say, look, someone's going to do Jurassic Park. I mean, at the time we didn't know, but it was going to be Kenner. Somebody was going to do Jurassic Park. So we said, why should we let them have the marketplace all to themselves? Plus, dinosaurs are a classic preschool toy theme. Every preschool little boy and little girl plays with dinosaurs at some point in their childhood. So this was an opportunity to maybe steal a little thunder from a competitor, not have to advertise it. We'd play off the advertising of our competition and have a little fun. And so I threw out into the mix the idea of doing a G.I. Joe versus dinosaur theme. And that's all I did. I threw out a theme. And the next thing I know, our designers and my marketing guy at the time, Vinny DeLeva, came up with the whole idea of the Dino Hunter theme. And it's not so far afield. I mean, I remember as a kid reading comic books from DC, Our Fighting Forces and Star Spangled War Stories, which featured Gunner and Sarge, two Marines trapped on an island in the Pacific. And it was like the Lost Island. They were fighting dinosaurs, not Japanese, on this, on this Pacific island. Occasionally a occasionally a Jap Zero would fly over and attack them, but basically they were being attacked by, Tyrannosaurus Rexes and Stegosauruses, etc. So it was kind of a fun theme to play around with.
Yeah.
Was there any talk? Was there any talk? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I was gonna say, I like how it kind of brought GI Joe into a sort of an adventure team type of thing from like the late 70s.
Yes, and that was also, an homage to the original GI Joe, where they'd have those adventure team themed play sets. So that had I still been on the brand longer, that was a new direction that we were going to start pursuing as well, developing themed adventure sets.
And I like that. And it's an interesting point. I think now that you mention it, I think the Dino Hunter set predated the Jurassic Park figure line. I think the Dino Hunter set was probably early 1993, and I think Jurassic Park action figures didn't actually come out until around summer to fall of 1993. So technically, because one of the common themes that people talk about when they talk about the Dino Hunters is that it's so cheesy and the dinosaur is so inferior to the actual Kenner dinosaurs, which were more realistic. But I think what people don't understand is like, well, they did it first. There was no realistic dinosaur with the dinosaur damage. You can pull a piece of skin right off of them kind of thing. That wasn't a thing yet for 6 more months.
Well, yeah. And I mean, and the other thing is that, and that's a great observation, Jay, but the other thing is, at this time we were being constrained financially by our bean counters, who were asking us to do less and less new tooling. And so, we had to work with what we had. That dinosaur was a sourced dinosaur from a Hong Kong vendor.
Yeah. Imperial Plastics. We had our Hong Kong office go into the marketplace, find the vendor who made different dinosaurs. They sent us a bunch of dinosaurs. And we ended up always referring to that as a Chewy dog toy, So, we weren't always proud of what that was, but we were definitely proud of the direction we were moving in. I think it's just cool in the way that it's so simple. I understand that some people say it's lazy, but in reality, it's driven such a popularity for that. The original dinosaur, the Tyrannosaur, which we call the Hugosaurus or the Derposaurus, is like a $200 item if you can find it now. And a lot of people, instead of getting that, will actually get the original Imperial Plastics Tyrannosaur from 1985, which it was based upon.
Yeah,
because it looks very similar. The arms were tooled differently. The arms on the real one stick out, and the one that Hasbro used are more like this.
Yeah.
Was there discussion to expand that whole idea with using dinosaurs? I mean, seeing the fact that there's a whole Dino Hunter logo and kind of theme. Was there any discussion as far as expanding that line, I guess, or segment?
Not that I recall, Dan. I think this was supposed to be a one shot. You may have you're my librarian. You're my archivist. you may have paperwork that
I haven't come across anything, but I didn't know.
You may have paperwork that says differently, but the whole point was we didn't want any new theme to enter the marketplace without GI Joe participating in that theme, whatever theme that was.
Nice.
Had a new Ghostbusters movie been coming out in the next few years, we would have had a GI Joe Hunts the Ghost Hunter.
Wow, really?
I mean, this is literally that was my battle plan moving forward. Unfortunately, we never got to incorporate all those battle plan ideas. But whatever hot new theme was going to be in the marketplace, GI Joe was going to participate.
That's great.
So I came across something yesterday. I got a package of different things and sculpt material and stuff. And one of the sculpt sheets, there's a Duke for something called battle scanners. And I remember hearing about battle scanners. And, I texted Kirk Brown and asked him, hey, this is you. This is your drawing. So he remembers it kind of didn't get picked up by Joe, but eventually Star Wars did it. So do you remember that
Yeah.
segment and what you guys were doing? You want to talk maybe a little bit about that? So since I thought that's the first time I've ever seen anything materialize as far as a sculpt sheet in my from my experience.
Battle Scanners was a very high technology idea but they used low tech. I mean, it's kind of weird, but it was an idea brought to us by an outside inventing firm, AGE, Abrams Gentili Entertainment. Marty Abrams, who had been the CEO of Mego Toys, founded an inventing and consulting firm. And so he was inventing all kinds of crazy ideas for the toy business. Marty had a good relationship with Hasbro, with our inventors, our inventing group. Marty and I had a good relationship. And Marty brought to us a very simple but unique idea called Battle Scanners. And it made use of at the time, electronic sounds and voice were popular in toys. But they were expensive. You had to pay for individual computer chips that would go inside the figure. What was the name of the action figures that we did with the backpacks that had
Talking Battle Commanders?
Talking Battle Commanders. Okay, so those were expensive because each backpack had to incorporate its own unique computer chip.
Mm-hmm.
Marty came up with the idea of putting all those sounds, all those commands inside a black box. So you could have 150 characters, sounds, etc., inside a 3x5 black box. The way you would activate the black box is that on the bottom of every G.I. Joe, foot would be a different molded grid. Okay, so it's almost like it almost predates QR codes. Okay, these were molded QR codes in the bottom of a G.I. Joe foot.
Oh, okay.
So it's a mechanical interface, not a computer interface. It was I'm recalling it, the best way I can remember. So it was a mechanical interface that when you put the figure onto a foot pad somewhere, and you had these foot pads located all over a play set or integrated into a vehicle, when you put the figure onto that foot pad, that would be connected to the black box, and the character would come to life. The character would give commands, the character would make sounds, etc. All cued to that individual foot peg that was molded in a pattern.
Right.
It sounds like
right.
Jason, you probably remember the G.I. Joe versus Cobra line. They did do that with remember the weapons. You put them in the vehicles and they would change. So they actually did end up taking that eventually. That's probably Daryl who did that for 2001.
Right before that, though, you know what really used that a lot? Do you guys remember the Simpsons action figures from the late 90s?
That was done. The Simpsons action figures were done 3 years after us.
Right, and that's where they did that. What
and
you described.
I have to believe it was Marty Abrams who sold that to them. Okay, because we ended up developing it. We ended up, incorporating it into our line, but because the way Marty structured the deal, as I recall, we would pay a penny and a half, I think it was, for every G.I. Joe figure that would incorporate this technology. And every figure would. In order for this to make sense, every G.I. Joe figure had to incorporate this feature. And we were selling at the time, let's just ballpark, 20 million figures.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So Marty was going to get a penny and a half over 20 million figures every year that we featured this concept. That's a lot of money.
That's decent.
So
Yeah.
before we decided to move forward with this, we wanted to research it. We wanted to test it with kids. So we brought kids into several different research facilities, and we tested the concept. And it was a big, wasn't the way kids played with G.I. Joe. Kids played with G.I. Joe in their own imagination. Marty didn't believe the results of the test, and he wanted to sit in on a test. So we arranged for another, test to have Marty and his partners come to the test. And when they saw how the reaction from kids, they walked away, with the handshake saying, "Well, thanks guys for at least, giving it a try, and we understand why you're passing on." But we were fully behind that concept until we tested it with kids. Now,
here's the sculpt sheet of it.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there was a whole range of figures, Dan. It was like every figure that particular year, I forget what year it was, every figure that year would incorporate because it was nothing to tool. I mean, literally, you're gonna be tooling the figure. All you had to do was put an insert into the mold for the bottom of the feet, and it would, put a different grid pattern molded into that foot that would identify that character every time it was placed on the talking unit.
Yeah, this is dated 1/28/91. So
that would have been for the
92.
That would have been for the 92-93 product line.
Oh wow, that was way before the other guys did it. Huh.
Oh yeah. Marty Abrams was one of the most clever inventors I've ever encountered. He was so ingenious. I really always enjoyed, meeting him and working with him on things.
Were most of his concepts like technology driven, or was there other simple concepts?
No, I'm sure he had a variety of them.
Okay.
He represented, for instance, he represented Bucky O'Hare.
Okay.
There was nothing high tech about Bucky O'Hare, other than it was a comic book that Larry Hama had been working on, who was friends with Marty, and Marty represented Bucky O'Hare. Along with Neil Adams and all that. So it was kind of weird. There was a kind of a mixture of everybody working together on things.
Dan, are you recording, by the way?
I think David is.
Can you hear me?
Right.
Yeah, we hear you, David.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
We don't see you, but I know you're having tech issues.
I think my camera is cut out and I can't get it to come back, but I'm going to try and ask a couple of questions at the very least. I apologize for my technical issues. The fan club that was developed in the 80s, what was the thought process of the fan club and the impetus of offering toys through the mail and all the different cool ideas that came from that?
Well, the impetus was the whole flagpoint system that we had set up from day one with our packaging. And that was based on a suggestion from Stephen Hassefeld, the CEO at the time, who suggested that it was a unique way to promote the brand. And he asked us to take a look at how our partners in the UK, Palatoy, had incorporated something called a star system with their 12-inch G.I. Joe figures. And so we took a look at that, and we started printing the flag points on all our packages. And we never had a plan for it. We just, included all the flag points. And then we started getting letters from kids saying, "What am I saving all these flag points for?" And so, because Cobra and Cobra the Enemy were developed further downstream from the original 82 line, we held back Cobra Commander. So we released the Cobra Trooper and the Cobra Officer, and we held back Cobra Commander as a special offer.
Mhm.
The success of that Cobra Commander offer was so staggering that we decided to do that kind of a promotion every year. So I believe the second year might have been Major Blood. The
Yep.
third year was the Cobra, was the Manta Ray, surfboard.
Yep.
And we were generating so much interest that I was pulled out of the brand, and I was asked to help set up a direct mail business. At the time, direct marketing was becoming a whole new way for companies to do business in addition to selling at retail. Many companies were opening up a direct marketing division. And so I was asked to build a direct marketing division. I worked with an ad agency, BBDO, who was one of the first advertising agencies to have a separate direct marketing business. And so I worked with a team of people from this New York City Madison Avenue ad agency. When I watch episodes of Mad Men, that's based on this ad agency, BBDO, and they were incredibly, bright group of people. And we put together a couple of things. We put together a direct mail business that kept expanding upon G.I. Joe, and then started to incorporate Transformers, My Little Pony, some preschool items. Eventually, we built a business from scratch that level. When I left and was pulled back into Hasbro product development, it was a $15 million ongoing business for Hasbro. That was as big as almost many of our brands. And yet, it was a steady, ongoing piece of business.
Mhm.
BBDO also recommended that we develop our own independent direct mail business. You guys know it as Hasbro Toy Shop today, but we were going to be doing that back in 1987. We were going to start selling direct to consumers a lot of our own product line, along with specials and exclusives and, testing new concepts. But our management chickened out because they were afraid of the reaction from Toys R Us to us, having our own retail presence.
I see.
You were the original Hasbro Pulse.
Yeah, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. I like that. And Kirk, that's another thing is that at this point in time, as people get more further, into the nostalgia effect and they like to recollect G.I. Joe, the most popular, the most in demand, and oftentimes the most valuable figures, believe it or not, end up being the mail order things.
Yeah, which is crazy. And so many of those mail order things, I mean, obviously what they were leftover inventory.
That's right. A
That's
lot of
all
them
they were.
right?
We found a way to sell leftover inventory for better than full price, rather than closing it out to our customers at 10 cents on the dollar.
Well, some of them were also mail order exclusives. For example, like, the Starduster figures, Steel Brigade figures, all those recolored. I mean, almost every mail order was a recolorization or color palette swap for a retail figure. But nowadays, the reason why they're so popular and in demand is that people realize the rarity. I don't even think it was 1/20th or 1/30th as many of the mail orders were made because, it's a lot easier to go into a store and buy a toy. It's a lot more difficult for a parent to make that effort to write a check for, $3.95 or $4.95 when the figures on the pegs are $2.99 and mail it and then pay postage and handling. It's concentrated effort that, would dictate that the production of mail order is way, way less. Way less.
Yeah, that's crazy. Because in the 90s, when I was starting collecting, I mean, there's a gentleman I knew, he would have boxfuls. He had gotten this stuff like on sale, and I was buying fridges at the time. I was doing a lot of flipping and stuff, and I remember buying fridges from him for like 10 to 20 cents. It was like dirt cheap. Dirt cheap. I was buying them, or maybe a couple bucks. Maybe it wasn't that cheap, but maybe it was about $1 or $2. And then I was selling them, I think, for $10 to $11 to like a retailer, because he just had such an abundance. I was just like, okay, I'll take a $9 profit at that time, and now it's like, I mean, fridge is what, 100 and something, 120, 150 bucks. So
well,
that's crazy.
That's one example. Ninja Vipers, for example, are like,
Even
if
less.
you can find one bagged, $800, $900, $1,000. But yeah, Ninja Vipers, if you bought them from Hasbro Direct in the late '90s, they had them all the way to '97. I think they were $1.99.
Yeah.
You could buy
there's a
50 of them.
Yeah, I remember at some point there's like a Canadian warehouse find or something, and I know collectors is a paper form we had to fill out. I think I still have one, and I don't know if I got any figures from that, but I got a lot of vehicles. I got a lot of the bagged vehicles at that time, which is again the ferret, which is a different color, the firebat,
The Brazilian
all those
ferret,
things.
right?
Yeah, and I unfortunately, being young and dumb, not realizing value, which again I had fun with it. I ended up opening like the Cobra Wolf and customizing it. The Sea Ray, I opened up and customized it because again, it was so dirt cheap. You didn't think like, and again, I don't do it for the value anyway, but still, I wish I would have had doubles before I started customizing things. So
you never know. You never know, guys.
Dan,
speaking of, good.
Dan, since you mentioned the fridge, I was curious about what the impetus on the celebrity inclusion into G.I. Joe with Sergeant Slaughter, the fridge, and possibly Rocky Balboa Stallone as well. Why go down that road?
We were always trying to be topical. And I'm trying to think who came first. Was Fridge our first?
Fridge was after Sergeant Slaughter.
So Sergeant Slaughter was our first?
Yeah, Sergeant Slaughter was 1985. He was a mail order, and then he was retail in 1986.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fridge was 1986 to 1987, right?
Which was interesting.
William Perry.
With the fridge, because I was reading for the upcoming books, I was going through memos, and it's interesting to see that some of the mail away fridge and the released one that came with the Triple T were actually being developed almost at the same time. It's interesting to see that overlappage as far as development. So
yeah, the Slaughter mail order had more premium paint applications. The GI Joe stripes on the leg, the USA on the chest piece, and then the retail Slaughter that came out a year later. I guess it's just as popular, but it did have less premium paint on it.
Yeah,
I think. Go ahead, Dan.
I think you and I've teased you a little bit, Kirk, on I'm just shocked that you guys chose a Chicago Bear after they just beat New England Patriots in the Super Bowl. I mean, it just shocks me you guys allowed that.
There was nobody bigger at the time. Pun intended. There was no celebrity bigger at the time than Fridge Perry.
That's right.
And so I mean that was just a fun thing for us to do. Have some fun. Slaughter just made sense because of his personality as part of the WW at the time after the WWF. And we did not have the WWF license. That was a license that was being handled by LJN. And this was a way of tweaking LJN a little bit. But his personality as a drill instructor, a quote, former drill instructor, just made perfect sense to fit in with G.I. Joe. Fridge was simply because he was so popular. I remember him and his wife coming to Hasbro and to close the deal. And, she was the brains behind his success. He would have signed his rights off just for the lunch we gave him. But she was the hard-nosed businesswoman, and she struck a good deal for him. And then Stallone, again, Rocky movies were extremely popular. We wanted to try and stay current with current trends. And then his agent, did us dirt by signing a deal with Coleco to do Rambo figures.
That's right.
So we just pulled away from that. And I think that's what kind of soured us on doing real world celebrities was how they could slice the baloney, the old licensing term, how they could carve up a license many different ways. So we just backed away from doing any more future celebrity licenses.
So here's an interesting question for you. If you were given the brand, and is there anybody that you wish you could either from that time period or even today, besides Tom Brady, I'm sure, is there anybody else that you think you would love to have or would incorporate now, just as a fun topic or idea?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I wouldn't do sports celebrities anymore. Maybe with the exception of somebody like maybe Gronk. He would be like, he's a larger than life kind of guy. Brady,
it's cool code name too, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I could see us maybe thinking about doing Gronk. Brady, I don't know. I mean, he's kind of too much of a pretty boy.
He's your Duke. He's your new Duke.
Right.
I don't know. I mean,
I'm just joking. Being a Pats fan, I got to give you stuff. So
yeah.
Let's see. Who might we think about? Well, and not that it would be a real personality, but a toy brand that has never been successful, which is odd to me, is James Bond. And I might take a flyer at incorporating James Bond into the world of G.I. Joe. And I think that could be, a truly interesting idea. Now,
G.I. Joe actually had a James Bond from a season 2 episode with a secret agent Burke, actually, to a certain degree. Yeah. But I know what you mean.
But I mean, I'm talking about actually incorporating 007 into the.
That would be cool.
I mean, the perfect mold would have been the Joe Colton, right, from the club that they put out. That would have been a nice.
Well, that would have been cool, but no, I'm talking like in actuality, our partners over in the UK, Action Man, did do a James Bond, a 007 James Bond license in the 12-inch scale.
Gotcha.
So when we did the Hall of Fame G.I. Joes, they incorporated, and they did a couple. I'm looking around my basement because I know I have the packaging, but I don't have the figures. But I think I packed the packaging away. But anyway, they did, the classic James Bond in a tuxedo. And then, for when he would go gambling in Casino Royale. And then they did a G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe 007 from Thunderball with him in a scuba suit, that orange scuba suit. And so it's been done, but I would think that, a whole sub brand. I mean, one of the things we investigated and which we did successfully with G.I. Joe, we were the first license to incorporate outside licenses into G.I. Joe. Street Fighter.
And I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
About Street Fighter.
For us to incorporate a whole sub brand, 007 sub brand, if I was still there, that wasn't too far out of the realm of possibility. Don't forget, our team was also developing James Bond Jr.
That's right.
So, and that was getting us into knowing the Broccoli's and the Wilsons who handle the James Bond movies. So that was going to be a stepping stone for us to incorporate, maybe even do our own separate G.I. Joe, our own separate 007 line. Yeah. But that would have been something that could have been truly unique.
That would have been really cool to have the G.I. Joe logo with 007 underneath it, just like
that would be
the Street Fighter logo. And you could have maybe 3 heroes and 3 villains, and that maybe would be the only series for that year.
Yeah.
Kind of like a DEF almost or something. Now, Kirk, behind you, I see a picture of a certain president from that time period, and I knew Rudat did a rendering of President Reagan.
Yep.
Did some color studies. I mean, how realistic was it that you were going to maybe potentially create a figure based on Ronald Reagan?
Well, it was proposed. It wasn't very realistic. but it was proposed. And you know, Ron suggested it. But you know, again, the danger of incorporating real personalities into a line, you know, it's less dangerous now, I guess, because we're such a tolerant society that, you know, somebody gets in trouble, you know, with the law or another scandal, we kind of not overlook the scandal, but we kind of overlook it in terms of their, the way they might be portrayed as part of a brand. But back then, sensitivities were a lot different. Not that Reagan would do anything, you know, dumb, but you never know, right? And I always remember a marketing story when I teach my marketing classes about licensing, that Camel cigarettes was developed by R.J. Reynolds in 1912. And Camel cigarettes, before they were called Camels, they were looking for a name. R.J. Reynolds was looking for a name for their cigarette. And so somebody suggested to add a little exotic branding to it, suggested Kaiser Wilhelm cigarettes. Okay. Well, what did Kaiser Wilhelm do in 1914? Started World War I.
Yeah.
So the lesson was, in marketing, was never associate your product with a real person, because you never know what the real person, what the real person might do. Right. So, you know, I mean, we played around with lots of things. Ron was always, I believe, I don't know that he ever sketched it, but we talked about John Wayne, you know, incorporating John Wayne into the G.I. Joe brand. You know, there were lots of things we experimented with. Never got very far, simply because, you know, we had a brand that could stand on its own. And to incorporate other licenses is different than incorporating a real person.
It's true. Yep.
Kirk.
And yes.
Oh, sorry. You want to finish your thought?
No, I was just going to say, you know, and even going back to people like Sarge and Fridge Perry, and you know, who knows what they could have done.
Well, yeah.
You know,
I mean, look at Hulk Hogan's
in their personal lives. Who knows what they could have been accused of or whatever. So it was a little dangerous what we did, but still fun.
You never had to worry about you know, that one character, Law. I mean, he was never going to do anything to jeopardize
he'd go after
his brand.
He'd go after those bad guys.
Yeah.
Kirk, there was I believe, a year delay due to political situations in the world at the time the G.I. Joe was being developed. So you delayed it to 82. And G.I. Joe was always supposed to be, what, like 10 years in the future? And the technology was supposed to be a little bit ahead of its time. Why? Is it because of the world situations, the real life situations, that you kind of put G.I. Joe outside the real world?
No. I mean, I think the point of making G.I. Joe 5 to 10 years ahead of time was just, it gave us an opportunity to do more, gave our designers an opportunity to do more exotic designs. We didn't want to necessarily do a product line that, you know, was based off, and we don't want to make model kits. Okay. We didn't, even though we ended up making and destroying the model kit business. That's my theory anyway. Even though our toys were snapped together model kits, they were never totally 100% accurate, realistic model kits. And we never wanted to do that, because we wanted kids to use their imaginations. We didn't want G.I. Joe to be driving an M1A1 Abrams tank. We didn't necessarily want him, you know, flying an F-14, although we ended up doing a close version of an F-14. But even if you take a look at the design of that F-14, it's not 100% accurate to an actual F-14. So we always wanted to, you know, use that as a way of giving our designers much more freedom than to just say, hey, here's a picture of an F-16, here's a picture of a Leopard, German Leopard tank, here's a picture of a Israeli Merkava tank, you know, give us a version of it.
Right.
We wanted to have them feel a little more free to do that.
And that's why G.I. Joe is special.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. But I mean, that's the other thing about the design of the characters. I mean, none of our characters are actual 100% military accurate.
Right.
And there was a reason for that. You know, the reason was we wanted to, you know, have kids use their imagination. Now, I love the fact that other toy companies right now, like I love Marauders. I love the work they're doing over there with, you know, really 100%, you know, accurate military figures in 3 3/4 inch scale. I take a look at, you know, other companies. I take a look at like Joy Toy, who has the, you know, 3 3/4 inch line with, you know, armor, mecha bots and all that. And I'm totally impressed by what they do. And I love what Bobby Valla is doing with Valaverse. You know, and which are a kind of a blend of accurate but future military plus fantasy, you know. And so all of that are, you know, I think we kind of laid out a nice formula for doing a military line.
That being said, before G.I. Joe was finished off, you were developing Sergeant Savage and then G.I. Joe Extreme. But there was 3 or 4 other really interesting ideas with Star Brigade going forward, with Monster Hunters, and all this really fun sci-fi stuff. I would have absolutely ate all that up in the 90s if it had come out. And I've seen developmental stuff on it with videos at different conventions. What was the reasoning to go to Sergeant Savage and G.I. Joe Extreme rather continue on with those cool exotic sci-fi elements?
Well, I don't think that we weren't going to continue on. You're talking about, you know, 93, 94, 94, 95. Hasbro was going through a transitional period at that time. Not for the good, especially when it affected the boys' toys business, where we were being transitioned out of our jobs and Kenner was being transitioned into our jobs. And so, unbeknownst to us, there were plans to move forward with Star Brigade. There were plans to, you know, continue growing Star Brigade. We saw Star Brigade as a way to blunt the reintroduction of Star Wars, and we blunted Star Wars for maybe 4 or 5 years before it was reintroduced. That goes back to what I said at the beginning of the interview. You know, G.I. Joe was supposed to represent everything to every boy. We were never going to let any new concept come into the marketplace without us attacking it. We had plans to develop, you know, our own version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles within G.I. Joe. Now, they weren't going to be mutant turtles, but we had plans, you know, at least I had to write up somewhere of
Manimals, maybe, right?
No. They were going to be, you know, I was going to play off the idea of teenage, and we were going to have, you know, Teenage Commandos, you know, working name, you know, not the right name, but, you know, the whole idea was, you know, when you join the military, who joins the military? 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. And so our idea was, let's capitalize on that. G.I. Joe, every one of those G.I. Joes that you guys play with, they're all 35 plus. If you looked at their actual, you know, age, you know, that's not, those guys should all be, you know, sergeants and above, you know? And so we were playing around with the idea of a young line of young recruits. Never got off the drawing board because things had transitioned over to Kenner. So, you know, Star Brigade probably would have continued at least for another year. Sergeant Savage was, you know, a reaction to senior management, you know, saying that our 3 3/4 inch line of figures looked puny. I remember being in a line review and being, critiqued by, a bean cruncher, bean counter, saying our figures looked puny compared to Kenner's Batman. We didn't know where that comment came from, and then 2 months later, 3 months later, we find out Hasbro acquires Kenner. So we knew that they were in line reviews with Kenner people looking at, Kenner's Batman line. And so we said, well, we're not going to take that criticism lightly. We're going to redo G.I. Joe. And we didn't want to go to the 6-inch scale. But remember, Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe was the smallest action figure brand at the time. The action figure marketplace had changed. 3 3/4 inch was no longer the standard size anymore. Masters of the Universe was bigger. Ninja Turtles was bigger. Almost every boys action brand was bigger than G.I. Joe. And so Savage was an attempt to not go too big, but still bigger. And we looked at Savage as a unique opportunity to create a more realistic military line. And that's what Savage was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
So with the advent of all the new digital technology and things like that, it's weird to go back and try to armchair quarterback something that you did 40 years ago. But would you have done something different if you had some of the technology of today?
Yes. I look at our figures, and they have a unique, quaint charm to them. Okay, but I look at our figures and I compare them today with what's being done in 3 3/4 inch figures today, or action figure sculpting today, and I'm at a loss for words as to how our G.I. Joes even sold. How you guys got so excited about buying these little plastic lumps of nothing. I was always, pushing and trying to get our designers, our engineers, was always pushing them to look outside at our competition, and how do we do things differently. And around 92, maybe 93, Todd McFarlane came out with Spawn and all of his action figures that eventually led to his sports figures, and then, etc. And I was just blown away by the quality of the sculpture, by the quality of the painting, and by the quality of everything that he did. And I tried to move our designers and our engineers into trying to figure out how do we incorporate more realism into our sculpting. One of the things I asked for, and it never happened because we were off the brand by then, my team and I, we were going to start molding the G.I. Joe figures in dull finish. The plastic would be vapor blasted, so that instead of it being high shiny styrene or an ABS, everything would be dull, so it would look more like clothing. Okay, right. We were even playing around with adding a slight texture to some of the clothing, so that when you really looked up close at the figure, the texture of fabric, you could see it on the jerseys or the blouses of the G.I. Joe figures. That never happened, but that's where we were headed. We were trying to challenge ourselves to make Joe much more realistic.
I mean, I think you made an interesting comment about, why do we buy it? And I find myself, as someone who was a completist at one point, and had all this stuff from the modern era, I still appreciate the modern era, but there's just something about the simplicity of the vintage line.
Oh yeah.
And I think from a kid standpoint, I mean, I know giving Noah some of the modern stuff. I mean, I love the articulation, but it could be almost too much at times. When the guy's foot can kind of reach his head, it's like they can't even pose them properly. Where you take a classic vintage figure, as long as it still has its heel on it, you could pretty much stand those up pretty easily without even the foot peg. Whereas the modern stuff, I think it is a little bit harder. So, I mean, it's funny how you kind of, and it's not even the nostalgia factor. It's just the simplicity and knowing, I think, an appreciation of knowing what the tools were available at that time. So like, you're talking about texture and stuff, and I have the Dollar General shipwreck here where you can see the texture. You probably can't see it in a picture, but
you can see
I'm
familiar with the figure. Yep.
The texture on his shirt and stuff. But again, that's digitally. And so, I think it all comes back to just going back to that traditional way of sculpting. And you guys did something interesting too with, sculpting at 2-to-1. Because I don't know if Kenner did that. I think Kenner did 1-to-1, correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't know.
When they did their line. But that's for me. I mean, that's just my personal opinion. I think it's the simplicity. And then I think just my knowledge of, and then many people's knowledge of, this is all done by hand. They didn't have computers to sculpt this character. They literally had to do it by hand. So I think there's just that greater appreciation, I think, for that. But that's my opinion. Maybe these guys have something.
It's true.
Totally true.
I would like to ask one more question because I don't want to hold you up too long. But the development of the G.I. Joe animated feature film in '86, in response to My Little Pony, Transformers, and that stuff, did that impact the sales of G.I. Joe? And were the characters that were not included, like Big Glob and Pythona, what was the reasoning behind that?
I was not on the brand at the time of the G.I. Joe movie. And so I didn't have any input into the development, of the movie, quote, movie line. And I'm only going to speculate, but the people running the brand at the time, who happen to be good friends of mine, I don't know that they had the same feel for the characters that I did and that the designers did at the time. So I don't know if they, and I also don't know if Griffin Bacall, who did the character development for the movie, gave those guys a heads up as to how important these characters would be and etc., or that there would even be new characters. So that's the only way.
5 or 6.
Yeah, I mean that's the only way I can explain why they weren't incorporated into a product line. It's just somebody dropped the ball. Whether it was Griffin Bacall or whether it was the people at the time working on the brand.
Yeah, there was 2 figures that were noticeably absent, and that was Pythona and Big Lob. And we got Big Lob in 2010. He was the final O-ring figure ever, and he was kind of a novelty figure. And that's basically all it comes down to when it comes to it. I had one last question. This is a little bit thought process, but what made G.I. Joe of your time period work exceptionally well? It pretty much was the #1 selling boys toy for inside of 8 to 10 years. But what's also made it struggle since then? Why did it work then? And why did it struggle, the year 98 to 2000 and beyond?
That's a great question. I think what made it successful, let's call it the second time around, the Real American Hero version, was we captured a spirit of patriotism in the marketplace.
Right.
We pioneered a lot of the techniques for selling action figures that other people, since then have jumped on. And so I think that could help explain why we were successful up until say 94, 95. Why hasn't it been successful since? Or as successful since? I think the toy business has changed dramatically. I think there's a lot more people doing action figure brands. Not as many as there were. I mean, I once counted, I think it was for 92, 55 boys action figure brands introduced at Toy Fair. 55.
Right. Okay. Yeah,
now, not all of them would go on to be successful. Many of them, 90% of them, probably never got out of Toy Fair. But 55 action figure brands. That's a lot of competition.
Saturation, crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of competition. And I think, obviously society's changed. The way kids play has changed. And so I think that's contributed to the fact that, G.I. Joe is not that successful again. I think a lot of knockoff product has had an impact on G.I. Joe. In knockoff. I think Glenard's product, the core, has been around almost as long as G.I. Joe.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
That's quality stuff. I mean, when you think of when I look at it, there's a lot of great product there. Not as great as we did, or certainly not the posability, but there's a lot of interesting design there, and vehicles are pretty good. There was a company that I bought a lot of their product. In fact, I still have a lot of it packed away. Chap May, Chinese company.
Yeah.
They did, and they still do a lot of knockoff military product. Not as good as they used to. The sculpting is, not as great as it once was, but they were part of Toys R Us's generic line of military figures. That's another problem. How do you capture military and do a successful brand of military unless you've got the name G.I. Joe? You got a lot of competition. Hey, you're back, Dave.
Yeah. And I think another thing would actually be that, boys don't play with action figures as much as they used to. There's more stimulating things available in the form of iPhones, iPods, iPads, Xboxes.
Yep.
So it's all sorts of things.
Yeah. So, however, I did notice something interesting. I was at Dollar Tree last Saturday. And are you guys familiar with their line of action figures?
A little bit. Seen them.
They're not great.
No.
They're not great, but for $1.
Yeah. Right.
And then I noticed, or $1.25, whatever it is now. Now I notice, and I'm looking for it because I bought the comic book. They have a comic book.
Mm-hmm.
And issue 1 is out. They're going to come out with a second issue. And the comic book, they've stolen the G.I. Joe marketing plan. Whoever's buying toys for Dollar Tree went to school on G.I. Joe 1982. Okay? And has come out with a comic book and a line of figures and accessories and vehicles for $1.25.
That's right. That's right.
So now you tell me, how does G.I. Joe come? How does an action figure brand, G.I. Joe or anyone, compete against that price?
Right.
It's tough. It's tough.
And you make a good point. I mean, I don't know what I had to go see which figures. I mean, there's some figures I've seen at either Dollar Tree or Dollar General, and they're pretty bad.
Here it is.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Final Action.
Final Faction.
Final
Impact.
Faction. Yeah.
The origin story. And here's what's great.
Nice.
Catalog right there. Yeah.
Cross sell. There's your catalog. Right?
Wow.
Brilliant.
I don't know if I've seen those ones. But to your point, I mean, you make a great point where with small kids, parents are going to go for to save $1. I mean, as long as the quality is decent, I think people, it's like, I remember as a kid, I would get some of the off brands, off of G.I. Joe, like some of the ninjas. I still have them somewhere. But I they're similar enough that, for my parents, from that standpoint, they didn't care. And as a kid, I didn't care.
Exactly.
So you make a great point. Where,
but now
as long as they're not horrible, but
right. But you guys are looking at it from the lens of 35 to 50-year-olds now. Not that you guys are close to 50, but there are some Joe friends that I have that are that first generation, those 1982 kids,
Yeah.
I
they're
am.
getting close. They're getting close to that. Well,
Closer than I want to admit. So
no, you guys
David's
aren't.
David just turned 49, man. How about
Oh,
that?
congratulations, David.
Thank you.
But there's my point. You guys look at it from the lens of an adult, and you critique the GI Joe brand. Like I love the discussion that I have with people about neon GI Joes. I just loved, getting tossed into an arena with those guys who hate
Same.
neon.
Love it.
I loved it, Kurt. So I'm on your side. I thought it was very unique and very imaginative, and I love the out of this world type stuff. But
yeah.
I'm a minority.
But my point is, you guys look at it from that perspective. And many of your fellow friends look at it from this 45 to 50-year-old perspective. And why wasn't everything looking real military? Why did characters have to have neon? Why do they have big guns?
Yeah,
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, remember what it was like when you were 8 years old. That's how you should be looking at the GI Joe brand. What was it like when you were 8 years old?
like Manimals. I know most don't like Manimals. I don't know. I've
Right.
always found them interesting to see.
I find it fantastic.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, Alan Ferraro, who worked on the brand, he's part of the Mech Tech group. He had said something to me years later. I even mentioned it to Vinny, and Vinny's like, damn, I didn't think about that. But he was saying, it would have been cool to do the Manimals at the Paintmaster size. Like to have them that big, in size, and then battle the Joes. So, I mean, they're not huge, but they're bigger. They're much bigger than the ones that came out or that we're going to be planned to release. So,
they were like 4 inches, and they could have been like 6 or 7. That would have been, almost like Independence Day aliens.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just fun to, I like some of the 90 era. And I've grown to like him even more and more as been collecting. But yeah, neon, non-neon, it's just a color. If you don't like it, go customize it, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. All those figures ended up being reissued, 5 to 10 years later as convention exclusives in more sensible colors anyways. So there's no gripe anymore with that when you think about it.
Yeah.
So.
So I want to thank Kurt for taking the time to join us today. We appreciate talking to you and picking your brain and trying to learn more about this brand that we love so much. And thank you, Jason, and thank you, Dan, for taking the time to come today. I also want to thank Brian Sauer, who is our technical advisor, who's editing our videos and stuff like that. Thank you, Brian, for doing that. I also want to let the fans know if you have any questions or would like to make suggestions for future episodes of the G.I. Joe Fan Club Live, you can do so below. You can't see me pointing below, but below when this video gets posted. So I look forward to seeing you in the future, Kurt. And
yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
All right, guys. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Yo,
Take
Joe.
Bye-bye. Yo, Joe.
Yo, Joe.